Welcome back to another episode of Wickedly Judged, the podcast where we shine a light on wrongful convictions, expose flaws in the justice system, and fight for reform through advocacy. I'm your host, Rebecca, and as always, I'm so thankful you're here with me today. Before we dive into today's story, I'd like to take a moment to thank our incredible sponsor who make this podcast possible. First, a huge thank you to Veteran Alliance for sponsoring this episode. Veteran Alliance is committed to supporting justice reform and standing with those who fight for what's right. Their dedication to advocacy aligns perfectly with our mission here at Wickedly Judged. And, of course, a massive shout out to JP Verse of Versefire Records for providing our intro and outro music. His talent and creativity helps set the tone for every episode, and we couldn't be more grateful for his support. If you haven't already, don't forget to check out our merch store on our website. We've got some amazing designs, including the Wickedly Judged logo t-shirt, the Prison Reform t-shirt, and the Justice is Blind t-shirt. Every purchase helps us keep this movement alive and fuels our mission to expose injustice. Head on over to wickedlyjudged.com to grab yours today. And as always, if you believe in what we're doing, subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can make a difference. Now, grab you a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's get into today's episode. Our story takes us to Ingham County, Michigan, where a family has been torn apart by a wrongful conviction. Mary and her husband Doug took in their great niece in 2015 after her mother's struggles with addiction. For nearly a year, they provided a stable and loving environment for the young girl. And during that time, her behavior improved dramatically. But when she returned to her mother's care, things took a turn for the worse. Her mother continued to use heroin and eventually overdosed again. The girl's life spiraled into chaos. And after reconnecting with her father, a man with a criminal history, the situation became even more troubling. One day, during a visit with her father's family, the girl made an accusation of molestation. Initially, her story was very vague, but over time, it grew more elaborate. Eventually, she accused Mary's husband, Doug, of being the perpetrator. Despite a complete lack of physical evidence or corroborating witnesses, Michigan law allowed this case to move forward based solely on the accuser's word. What followed was a heartbreaking trial filled with judicial bias, a flawed legal process, and devastating consequences for Mary, Doug, and their family. I had the opportunity to sit down with Mary to hear her story directly. In this interview, she shares the emotional and legal challenges her family has faced, the toll that this has taken on their lives, and her unwavering fight for justice. Now, let's head on over to that pre-recorded interview and listen to Mary's story in her own words. All right, guys, thank you for joining this episode of Wickedly Judged. I have Mary on the line, and we are going to be doing an interview regarding her husband's case. Mary, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to get right into this interview. Can you provide a detailed timeline of events leading up to the accusations and the trial?
Yes, I became guardian of my niece for about a year between 2015 and 2016. Her mother had overdosed the first time and was revived in front of her, so she had to come and live with us. She went to our school district, so it worked out fine. She left within 11 months, and then 6 years later, a lot of things had transpired in her life. Her mother ended up dying of an overdose. Her father, who she'd never met, got out of prison. She had to go stay with other relatives, and when she was at the father's house, a sibling was talking about being molested. And then she said, "Oh, it happened to me too." And it started from there, and she went home and told her grandma, and then they did the forensic interview, and that's how we got into this.
What was your niece's behavior like before and after returning to her mother's care?
Before she even came to us, she was being passed over to a drug dealer. He didn't have a job. She was living with him, sleeping in his bed until she was 5 years old. There was a lot of anxiety. I had some questions about him, looked him up, found out he was a criminal, and talked to my sister, who's her grandma, and said, "This needs to stop." And I started doing respite care with her a little bit. She started acting a little better after leaving his home. And when she came to us, she was, for the first month or so, really traumatized because she saw her mom basically die in front of her. And so she had nightmares and whatnot. But within a month of just having stability, she was, had us involved in her school system, was involved in activities, caught up with her class by spring because she had missed 40 days of kindergarten when she was with her mom. So caught up with her class in spring. I took her to counseling. We saw nothing but her going up. No more nightmares, happy child, involved in things, became more social. But then when she left us a couple of years later, she got back with her mom, and it was okay until her mom overdosed. When her mom overdosed, she went to the grandma. That's when she died. Then she went to the grandma, and the grandma's been involved in criminality and drugs and all kinds of stuff. So it just went downhill from there. And that's when she started hanging with the dad's family, who are all drug dealers, criminals. And yeah.
So how did her relationship with her father and his lifestyle influence her behavior and decisions in life?
After her mom died, she was trying to get his attention. She still couldn't really get his attention. He most of the time just didn't have time for her, but it appeared that she made a pact to be just like her mom and dad. She even posted a Facebook post that said that she was a crazy MF&B like her mom, and it appeared like she was using drugs, wanted to be like her dad, hanging out, changed her the way she talked, very street language, sexual stuff, just nastiness, like the whole family did. So she was just trying to mimic what her mom was, and I guess trying to fit in with her dad's family.
Wow. What were the key turning points where her story evolved or changed?
Well, when it first happened, it was weird. We were at a birthday party and she wasn't there, but my sister was there with her little sister. And I said, "Where is she?" And she said, "Well, I dropped her off at her dad's house. And, she's so dramatic when I picked her up. She didn't want to come over here." I thought, okay, that's odd. And so then the next day, my sister called and said she wondered why she was acting like that, and asked her what happened, what was going on. And this is when she said that she thought she was molested. She said my husband was inappropriate with her, but it just kept building as they told the story. So it started out like that, and then it kept changing. And in the first forensic interview, she said a certain amount of stuff. That's what brought on the charges. But then a year and a half later, she developed another story after getting the police at her house for basically committing a crime. And that's when she was 13 and a half. She added the other stuff.
When and how were the accusations actually made against your husband?
They did the arraignment about 7 months after she had told the story, and after her forensic interview. It was about 7 months afterwards. And he already had a lawyer, so they actually tried to come to the house and arrest him, and they knew we had a lawyer, but they followed me to work and then flipped out their thing. And I was like, well, they said it was about my niece. And I said, well, we have a lawyer. So then they just said, okay, bring him in. He had already passed a polygraph, but the prosecutor at the time said she lost it. So when we got to the arraignment, the lawyer was asking about the polygraph, and she claimed she lost it, and they went ahead with the arraignment. And at that time, they put, how'd they do it? They put 3, they always stack the charges. So they put 3 second-degree charges because she was saying skin-to-skin contact. It was because she said it was in 3 different rooms in the house.
Wow. Were there ever any corroborating witnesses or any physical evidence that they presented during his trial?
No, and they didn't even investigate. During the trial, they asked the investigator why he didn't investigate, and he said that he didn't think that would be appropriate to go to his work. Because one of the things she said in trial was that he was home with her after school, which was just not the case, but they didn't use any of our evidence. They let us on the stand say it, but we had documents, they didn't use any of it.
Other than that, were there any other procedural irregularities in his trial?
There were jurors falling asleep. That was one. And my husband said a few times that he would tell the lawyer, and the lawyer would write it down that they're sleeping, but never interrupted the trial. The lawyer didn't stop the trial. And then there were 2 things with jurors. One was that after they had already selected the jury, a guy came out and said he thought he knew us. He went home and looked in his church directory and saw us. And so they had me come in there because I was sequestered, and then asked if I had ever seen him. And I said no, and Doug said he hadn't seen him. And so the judge decided to leave him on. And we were upset with that because what they essentially did is identified us as Christians and kind of made a big deal of it. And we live in a very liberal city, and we felt that that was not to our advantage. And then midway through the trial, another juror asked if he could be recused because they put up a picture that my niece drew of her mother when her mother called her a bad name, and she came home and drew that picture. And we had that picture to explain, and when we put it up there because it said "I hate you," the prosecutor cued into the child, "Oh, do you know that picture? Do you see that writing? Did you do that?" And just cued her to say no. So they took it down. Well, the juror wanted to talk to the judge and said he saw the picture, and since he saw the picture, he did not believe that the child drew the picture, and therefore could not believe my testimony at all, and I was the primary witness. He left him on as well. Yep. And then at the end of the trial, when they went to strike the jurors, the Michigan law is that you're supposed to do it by random, but they struck the person that was a church member, and they struck the guy who asked to be recused. And we had question with that, but there was a concern that the jury got tainted. And then of course with the expert witness, that was all speculation with her, and then the prosecutor used that expert witness stuff the whole time talking to the jury, and then she yelled so much you could see them just checking out. She would carry on and on and on and on until they couldn't take it anymore, nodding off or just looking like they weren't paying attention. And then our lawyer did not ask, like, he was very limited in the questions he asked. They acted like they were on a timeline just to get to the next trial. And so if they'd say, "Do you have any more questions?" and everybody in there, all of our support team said he did not ask enough questions, and he didn't show the stuff. They had even come and videoed my home and her bedroom and all that, and they recorded sounds and all different kinds of things, and the only thing they used is one picture.
Wow. How has the appellate attorney evaluated the evidence, and what is their case handling? How confident do you feel in how they're handling things now?
Confident. Yes, confident.
And they've had time to look over everything?
Yes, and has had some support on our end to pick through and point out things, people who were at the trial as observers. So they've been working together.
During the trial, what challenges did you face with legal representation?
We had what was supposed to be a good attorney, but he did not bring his partner. He brought somebody else, and we felt they were really weak. And also the judge seemed to be partial to the prosecutor, and we were told later that our attorney team had brought the judge to hearing because he's over 70 and just a sitting judge, and so he had already retired, and that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they were not able to remove him from the bench. So we feel like the judge was harder on the lawyer because, he had a bad experience with the lawyer, and we didn't know that in advance.
So then you think there were biases and misconduct from the prosecutor and the judge?
Yes.
How do you feel that affected the outcome?
Well, I think the misconduct from the prosecutor definitely affected the outcome, and I guess you could say the judge, because he allowed stuff. Because at the end, your defense gets to go and do their closing statement, and our attorney did well on that. And he had like a 52-page PowerPoint of all the reasons to doubt. He went through all of it in detail. And then when she got on there, she just creamed him with all kinds of stuff and said that he was lying. She didn't use that exact language, but she essentially expressed to the jury that we were not being honest. And at the end, the lawyer fought that, and the judge said if he didn't sit down, he was going to be in contempt, but he kept talking. And the judge finally said, well, if this was to go to, if he was to be convicted, this would be a reason for an appeal. And he said it right in there. Yep. So it was just, and then, our appellate attorney is going after some of the details in there that happened, because in part she just made me look like this evil person, and she concocted the story that the child did not know that sexual abuse was wrong, which is so not true, and that she was like doing things basically to play into this, and she definitely would not do that. I have a whole lot of reasons of knowing she would not do that. First thing, when she came to my house for just respite and I gave her a bath, this is when I suspected she was abused by somebody else. I put the towel around her like I would do with children and kind of went to pat her. She flung her arms right out both sides as if, don't touch me, and I even called her grandma and said, look, she should not be staying with this guy. I suspect that she may have been sexually abused. And that's what we think all along. It could have happened by somebody else, or she's just being devious and revengeful. But she really was sleeping with this other guy. Pretty much from birth, the mother would farm her out to him as a toy, just because he wanted to have a kid, supposedly. And had like 17-page criminal record, and kind of disappeared after I had her, and has been in and out of jail. So,
That's crazy.
But we do think that she possibly concocted the story, because she posted on Facebook 3 weeks before it that she put like somebody was on a yacht, and she said she'd like that, and then she said, one day I promise you I got my mind on the money and money on my mind. So we thought she was maybe going after money,
Wow.
And they didn't let us use that either.
No, of course not, because then that would throw their narrative completely off.
Well, and all of the stuff like that drawing was in her probate file, because I was a guardian, so the whole packet was in there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I think I think they can keep that locked, but it is, I have it, and the lawyer had it, but it's such a crack, because the prosecutor made this narrative that the reason she couldn't tell the second set of stories that she made up was because she was waiting until she got into a nurturing environment, or she couldn't even tell the first ones. In the nurturing environment, my sister is not, no, they're not even a nurturing environment. My sister has slapped them in the face, called them MFBs, all kinds of stuff, and just wants them out of her hair, but wanted the Social Security money that she got after, Yeah.
Wow. Now, how did the Michigan law regarding corroborating evidence impact your husband's case's outcome?
Well, they, at the end of the trial, even with all of the reasons to doubt that they went over, and they went over that in the jury instructions, the last thing the judge said was, but all you need to convict is her word.
So then what that's saying is you don't need any evidence, you don't need any medical records. Somebody can just walk up and say, hey, this person did this to me, and automatically they're guilty?
Yes. Yep. And 15 months afterwards, she threatened to kill somebody on Snapchat. She had a gun pointing at him. The police came to her house. That's when she made up the stories that got him the 25. Because the police, she lied to him first. I have the whole police report. And then she, when she came out with the gun and gave it to him, then they told my sister she needed to be disciplined. That's all they did. and she had threatened to kill a girl. So they told her to discipline. So right after that, she said, oh, I remembered more stuff, and went to the therapist and made up this outlandish stuff and dragged me into it, technically making me like a partner in crime, and just a long, ridiculous story. We never thought anybody believe it, but yep, that's all they need is her word.
Wow.
It should scare every American citizen and at least every Michigander, because, this is why we started getting involved. And we know so many people in Michigan that have either been falsely accused and taken the plea, or who are sitting in prison with that 25 minimum.
Wow.
And I don't know if you're aware, but Michigan is known as the state out of all of the 50 states with the most draconian sentencing laws.
Right. Now, how has this situation affected your family emotionally, socially, even financially?
Well, it was very traumatic for all of us. His family, his close friends, myself and him, of course, because neither one of us have ever been involved in any kind of legal issues, didn't even have tickets on our, driving record, and tried to be upstanding citizens and supporters of the police. And the big thing is, we thought we lived in a free country and hung our American flag proudly. And after he got convicted, I came home and I wanted to take it down. And that was the reality that day, that we really don't live in a free country. But my husband, being who he is, asked me if I would just hang it at half-staff. And I've had it like that ever since. And I just went and put a yellow ribbon around my tree and said, he's coming home. Yep. I don't know when. I hope I'm still going to be here. I'm a little older than him. But the social part of it, it's been awkward in the neighborhood because some people believe him. And, they plastered it on the news, and they even said it was 5 counts, which it wasn't. And yeah, so, a lot of people said they didn't even see it on the news, but they know that he's gone, and they know that that's what it is. So of course you're looked down upon. That doesn't bother me. Actually, he handles that pretty well too. He doesn't care what other people think. But the family thing has been really hard, because I am 100% loyal to my husband, and since my sister, who's the grandma, told lies on the stand, and then my other sister came along trying to say she was neutral, but ended up telling my third sister that she believed the stories about what she added me into. And I just can't be a part of, I can forgive them, and it's a daily walk. I forgive them for supporting it or for lying or whatever, but they did something to an innocent man, and he's in prison for 25 years, and I cannot have any contact. So they had a birthday party for my mother when she turned 90. I just chose not to be there because I didn't want my mom to not be able to have the party. My daughter, who just had a baby in March, she had a baby shower, and that one really hurt because I couldn't go. I was not going to go and be around people in my family who do not support us. And so I've just set boundaries, and it's hard, but I just can't. I don't consider them family anymore. Who I consider family are all the supporters who came out, and we've been blessed with the body of Christ. We have a ton of people that have surrounded us emotionally, financially. They've been helping me. They, write to Doug and drive me to him, and whatever they can do. So, but the thing that I could say that I wrote in my letters, because I've written to the president, all kinds of people, I've written to our legislators, and I said what essentially happened is you took a man who was a hardworking man all of his life, and a servant who would help anybody, even my sisters who were quickly throwing him under the bus because they hate men, but he'd be the one over doing their lawns or shoveling snow if they needed it. Anything I would ask him. He took care of the widow neighbor from the time she found out her husband died. He was involved in all kinds of servants' help, and the first thing that it did with us while we waited the 3 years for trial is we were scared to death to have any kids even walk by. We used to have neighbors come and talk to us, and we'd be like, ooh, get away from us. And I was a child mental health therapist, and I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. So you've lost another person who could work with children, who was trained to work with children. Prior to her coming to my house, I always had all the nieces and nephews over. And the thing about Doug is even his nieces wrote character, he had 15 character letters go in, and the nieces wrote how he was such a model uncle, and how he was never trying to touch them ever. He was almost kind of standoffish if they got too close to him because he never had kids of his own. My 2 daughters are from a previous marriage, but, seriously, we've helped out at events and things, and he Yeah, they just didn't believe any of that. And I think the sad thing is, too, if you're not aware of it, if you look up traits of a pedophile, two of the things that they have on there is you're white and you're married. And they've also tried to, he is a bald head, they've tried to make this narrative that old white bald men are pedophiles. And
Wow.
Me being a therapist, a pedophile typically happens, I work with pedophiles. I have clients on my caseload that are pedophiles. And typically what happens is they've been abused as children and then they act out, and it's just sad. It's very sad. They end up in prison and get abused even more. And the whole thing is sad. But Doug has never, he was, what would it be, in his mid-50s by the time, she was living here, and he's never had anything, and he's never had any kind of, so no evidence of anything, no reason to, and they didn't investigate. They never took his phone to see if, he had child pornography on there. They never came to the house. They just set it out, and I think my theory is they don't have to investigate because they don't have to have any evidence, which is sickening.
Very sickening.
My message is it should scare every American citizen if we are going to have laws like this. And I'm just hopeful that our new administration would restore, to constitutional law.
Absolutely.
Because his due process rights were definitely violated.
And it's becoming more and more obvious as I'm going through different cases and everything that's a norm across the board. Doesn't matter what state, city, nothing.
Yep.
It's all about the conviction rate, and they don't really investigate nothing.
Yep.
It's sad.
Well, and in Michigan, particularly in our county, this is Ingham County, Michigan, there had been a lot of shady stuff in Ingham County. One of the head prosecutors got caught with a prostitution ring. So he moved on. Then the next prosecutor who was on board had the Larry Nassar trial, if you're familiar with that, where he was a doctor at MSU, a sports doctor, and supposedly molested all of these children, and there was a class action lawsuit. So that happened in Ingham County, and all of the lawyers pretty much told us, if you're accused of this, you're sunk, because they're trying to redeem themselves because they did some things wrong with that. But, he did get convicted for, he'll never come out, and they had to move him to a different state, and he's even been attacked there. But there was clear evidence with that. There was corroborating evidence. There's nothing with my husband. And even the stuff she said about being home alone was not true. She never brought up that she went to daycare two days a week. My mother was a witness who said she had her the other 2 days a week. And then the other day I got out early because I flexed my time. And that was the day I took her to therapy. And all of this came out in the trial, and they didn't care. We were shocked. It gives me no hope at all in the criminal justice system. And we're dealing with another friend who, is going to be going on 5 years this fall and got a mistrial, and 10 of the jurors said not guilty, and they still are going back for more.
Wow.
And they 10 of them said he was not guilty on both deliberating days. And so, and they're really shady. And of course our, the attorney general here is, the three of them, basically, they've been after them for all kinds of broken law. But here we are with my husband, who's never done anything, sitting in prison for life if we can't get him out, because he's 62 and I'm 65. So my concern is, because I just keep telling him, you're coming home. no matter what, you're coming home. And I've just got to keep myself really healthy if we can't get this appeal and live long enough so that he can come home. But the health care and all that stuff is horrible. I can say, though, in Michigan with our advocacy group, I haven't been able to be involved in, but they just passed through the House bill of, it's called TACO, Transformation, Accountability, Culture Change, and Oversight. And so we're hoping the Senate takes it up too, because then there'll be more eyes in the prisons for all the bad crap that happened. It's so bizarre to me because because you said you're interested in crime. It's all over the internet and all over. There's all kinds of shows on TV about wrongful convictions and false allegations. And then there's the Innocence Project and John Grisham being involved in some of the, stuff in the books and everything out there. But I think until it actually happens to you, a loved one, or a friend, people don't realize the brevity of it.
No, I don't think they do. They just think, oh, well, they must have been guilty because they convicted them.
Yes.
I get that a lot. Like, it was at the point that some of the cases that I've seen, the family members don't even speak to him anymore because, well, he was convicted in court. They must be guilty. And it's like, no, that's not always true. What happened to innocent until proven guilty?
Right.
And to prove guilt, you have to have evidence.
Right.
And it's just crazy.
Well, in that law, my brother-in-law paid a lawyer to look up that Michigan rule. I've got it written out there, but it's been on the books since the 1800s. But what they said is they just started abusing it. And so, to change that law, like they said, it's a statutory law, so you're not going to remove the law, but you could amend the law. Yeah, it's just sick. But yeah, the one thing I can say about my husband is when he got sentenced, when I was able to talk to him on the phone, I said, babe, really, the ones who are really in cages are the ones who did this to you. The ones who know you're innocent and lied, the ones who convicted you knowing you're innocent, all of that. And he said, I know. He said, at least my soul is free. And he's a strong believer in the Lord, and that's basically what's gotten him to survive so far,
That's beautiful.
And he actually stood on the scripture. I've got it on my neck. It's Proverbs 29:25. It's like, it says, I will fear God and not man. That's basically the gist of it. So, and then the thing I have on the other side of this engraved is the brave 2.5%, because I'm sure you're aware that only probably even less than 2.5% stand for trial. Mm-hmm. They usually take pleas. And think about it, we already spent $225,000 that we didn't have. If you didn't have to do that, the trial was the biggest expense. And if you took a plea, and sadly the sex offender list, it sounds so horrible for people, but our appellate attorney, a lot of people said it's not a big deal anymore because people know that a lot of people are on it that are innocent.
Yep.
I mean, even police get charged. A police officer got charged and put on it for stopping to take a pee at night by another female. A female cop came by like, seriously, did you want him to wet his pants? He took a pee outside off the road. Like, how can this be? When we've lost, we have in our state, we have we had these foster parents. They were people who had their own kids, homeschooled their kids, fostered all these kids. It's in Shiawassee County. And I tried to get them to be involved in helps. He went to jail for a minimum of 25 because one of the foster girls that was over 18 came back and said, could I move back in? So they actually went to the trouble of checking with the foster agency, and the foster agency said, well, no, we don't recommend that. So when they told the girl she couldn't move back in, she made up stories on the foster dad. And after all of them helping all of those kids, he's sitting in prison for the rest of his life.
Oh, that's crazy.
Just like mine. Yeah. And my husband has run across many in the prison who are saying they're not guilty. And, now that we've been in this process, probably like you, it's hard for me to believe anybody's guilty unless there's cold, hard facts.
Right.
Because it's so easy to get that conviction without it. But, at the end of the day, no matter what happens, we have said we're like Job, and we're being tried like Job, but we do not want to turn our back on the Lord no matter what we suffer, because in the Bible it says that you are promised to be blessed by being persecuted, and we just have to hang on to that. And I'm sure our trauma is not over, but I just hope that people would listen to things like this and realize that there are so many stories out there like ours of people who have had their lives completely ruined by just somebody saying something.
Or by corrupt prosecutors fabricating evidence and judges going along with it and the courts upholding it.
Well, and with my niece, I feel for her. She was a victim of a lot of bad stuff throughout her childhood and still is. She doesn't have one safe person to be with. Even her family was there and harassed us and threatened to kill us. A couple of my friends out there, and I'm like, can you believe this is really happening? And they're drug dealers. The one had been to prison, the other one sold drugs all of his life. I mean, it's just insanity. And a part of it, I think, is that became very apparent in the trial, that because they went out and said, anybody who talks about my dead daughter, well, that's the one that I had to report. And I think, from a drug stance, they don't care if you're a mandated reporter or not. Then you are a snitch. So I think they saw me as a snitch, and it's just such a sad story. So, but anyway, once she tells the story, she gets all this attention that she hadn't been getting from any of her family members, by the prosecutor and by, counselors there and all this. And they say once a kid gets in this, even if they don't want to continue, they are stuck. And then even if she recanted her story, the prosecutor doesn't have to go anywhere with it, which that's insanity too, because people have recanted their stories. The prosecutors can say, don't care. I mean, they even put one to death in Missouri that the Innocence Project had the DNA that he was innocent in like August of last year, and they went ahead and killed him anyway, death penalty.
Wow.
So nobody is safe. But the sad thing for these children is, like my sister, when she first heard it, she said, well, why would she lie to me? She would never tell me a lie. And I thought, we lied to our mom all the time as teenagers. And she started this when she was 12 and a half. So when you look at the data, they say the kids who are most prone to tell lies about sexual offenses are kids between 12 and 13. And that's when she started. And they're usually trying to get out of trouble, or segue into something like this. And it could have even been because of the Me Too movement. Her sister says it, and she's like, oh, she's getting attention from her dad, so now I'll say that it happened to me too, right? And it's so easy for them to do that. But now the saddest thing about it is, like, we pray for her all the time because now we know that Doug's innocent, and we know that she's sitting on that. And how's that going to sit for her for the rest of her life?
Right.
Unless she's a sociopath, which we think might be the case, then that's not going to sit well that you have to swallow that pill for the rest of your life. And what's sad about that is I think the prosecutor should be held accountable for that, because they should have investigated. They should have, not twisted stories just to get the conviction, because you're essentially hurting a child who has already been hurt.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, she truthfully isn't getting any justice, because the one who potentially did this to her still walking the streets.
Mm-hmm.
And
and her mom, the sad thing about this is why we thought something went downhill after her mom died, because what they did, when she lived with me, that was always her worry. But she also was kind of afraid of her mom and didn't want to be around, because she was left to take care of her mom all the time. And it was just crazy. But when her mom died, what they did is made her mom into a hero. Her mom was not a hero. She loved her mom, no doubt. And I loved her mom. My sister's the one who did all the damage to her mother, and she was my first niece. I loved her mom, and I tried so hard to help her. But the thing is, she was a criminal. She was neglectful to her children, abusive. She was a heroin addict. She was a thief. And, those are all the things that she was. And they, at the funeral, made her into a hero. And that's their way of coping with things. But the child still knows underneath that that's a lie. And it's just, somebody dies and it's easier to remember the good parts, right? But it's a lie. And here we are, and it's wrecked our family. I mean, my mother, who's 90, it's been devastating to her because she believes my husband, and she does not believe it happened, but she's been put in this horrible spot of wanting to be a grandparent and a parent to everybody. And she tells me that all the time. And I just keep saying, Mom, you got to do what you got to do, but I can't, I can't have anything to do with them. They've just put us through hell.
Right.
So, yep, it totally split the family. But yeah, my message to anyone is, just understand it can happen to you. So try to have some sensitivity to people it does happen to. And then even for the people who are acting out, they need help. That's what I do on my job. They need help. Because you want to understand that if we have actual pedophiles, often they have been, imagine being a 3-year-old boy being raped with the details of that over and over again by a family member, what that's going to do to your mentality. And then when they act out as teenagers, they already start putting them in prison, and then they don't ever get them help. And if they don't get help, there's this hidden message with the pedophile: once a pedophile, always a pedophile. But that is not true. There is redemption if you get them the right treatment. A big part of it is getting them into safety, but we're not. For even people who act out like that, we're just putting them into more danger and never offering them any help. We used to have, when I first started my community mental health job, we used to have houses for these kids. Yeah, we got to go back to a treatment type of situation and true reforms. I know I'm preaching to the choir here.
No, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Because punishment, there are some crimes out there that need punishment. But at the end of the day, there's too many people out there that just need help.
Yep.
They just need help. But it's easier to lock them up in a cage and treat them like an animal than it is to actually care.
Yep.
So until the society understands that you need to care about your neighbor, you need to care about human beings and not treat them like animals. Mental illness is real.
Yes.
It can be treated.
Our disability rights person, she was at this legislative day we just went to, and she was up there, and you could see the trauma on her face, because for a minute I was like, I should do that, and then I was like, I can't handle that. I can't. I would never sleep if I had to go do that. It's hard enough just seeing my husband. But, the realities of it is, like in Michigan, and I don't know about all across the country, but in Michigan, years ago, we shut down all of our institutions. And there was a lot of bad things going on in the institutions. Why didn't we just go in and fix things? And now I feel bad for a lot of the correction officers, because if you get people with mental illness in there that's seriously mentally ill, like mine are, the ones I serve right now are SPMI, and, they need treatment. And if you put them in those environments, they do act out. And what are the guards going to do? So they put them in isolation to sort of keep them safe. But then they're pounding their heads and doing all that. Who's going to end up getting blamed if something happens to them? The guards. And there are bad guards, I get that. But I just really feel for people working in corrections, too, who are decent people. And I always tell them, the ones that are dealing with my husband, we're praying for you, because it's a tough world out there. And we should have more state mental health institutions and hospitals that they can go to, because it's a different thing than just your general population. You're mixing all of them together, and it's like the young ones. So many of the young ones are treated brutally, horribly, but we just passed, and I think that's nationwide now, I hope, where they're going to go back and you can't sentence, at least we passed it in Michigan, you can't sentence them for life and double life when they were under 21 years old. So there's going to be a lot of resentencing happening. So that's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. That's awesome.
But yeah, what good is it doing that my husband is away now? It's just costing the government more money. It's wrecked a lot of our family's mentality. I mean, his brother is so sweet, and all he can think of is, like, he wants a meeting with Trump because he's got to get his baby brother out. He can't stop thinking about it day and night. It keeps him awake. I mean, we had a ton of people come to sentencing. We filled the whole room, had to get up in the jurors booth. And then they were calling it and saying, I can't sleep, because it's not just about Doug, who they dearly love. It is about everybody knowing that any one of us, this could happen. And my thing I say too is, don't be so quick to judge people, because I strongly believe that when we are at those pearly gates, I know where I'm going. I believe in Jesus, and I repent, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, but Jesus came for the sick, right? Jesus came for the broken. And I believe that there's going to be a whole lot of that prison population sitting up there with Jesus, because they've been treated horribly. And when they do get in, it's a good way to get them to come to Christ.
Absolutely.
Because they're isolated. And my husband's been involved in that, trying to, mentor other guys. And my husband, I can say, has had God's hand upon him. I just hope that continues, because he's going to come down to, general population, and you know what that means. So For now, it's been okay, but I just pray. I'm praying that I pray for all the people who work in the prisons, and for everybody who's been impacted by this, that we all band together. There's got to be a better way. And we can't stop. I won't stop for the rest of my living years to fight for this. Even if Doug does come home, we're going to be partnering and doing more. So
I'm right there with you.
Appreciate
Mary and Doug's story is a powerful reminder of how flawed our justice system can be. From the lack of evidence to the judicial bias during the trial, her family's experience highlights the urgent need for reform. One of the most striking parts of Mary's interview was hearing how resilient she and Doug have been throughout this ordeal. Despite the emotional and financial toll, they've remained committed to fighting for justice, not just for themselves, but for others who may be facing similar situations. Mary's advocacy efforts, including her Facebook group, Guilty by Hearsay, and her upcoming website, are already making an impact. She's using her voice to push for change, connect with legislators, and raise awareness about the flaws in our justice system. But this fight is far from over. As Mary mentioned, there's an important hearing coming up on June 2nd, where her appellate attorney will argue for a mistrial. This could be a huge turning point in her family's fight for justice. If Mary's story moved you, I encourage you to take action. Join her Facebook group, Guilty by Hearsay, to stay updated on her case and connect with others who are also passionate about justice reform. Keep an eye out for her website launch, where she'll be sharing more about her story and her mission. And don't forget, you can support Wickedly Judged by subscribing to the podcast, leaving us a review, and sharing this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can all amplify these stories and push for the reform our justice system so desperately needs. Thank you again to our sponsors, Veteran Alliance and JP Verse of Versifier Records. Your support means everything to us and to the families that we are fighting for. Don't forget, on wickedlyjudged.com, we also have a donation button if you feel the need to help. Every dollar goes towards reform, towards getting these cases back into court. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to tune in next week for the second part of my interview with Mary. As always, stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay hopeful, because nobody deserves to be wickedly judged.